The stars above New Eden had never looked so dark. 12,000 warships hung in the void like metal monsters waiting to feed. Their hulls blocked out the light from distant suns. Their weapons glowed with the promise of death. The Vexery Dominion had come to claim another world. Nothing in the universe seemed capable of stopping them. Admiral Vesic stood on the command bridge of his flagship. The Eternal Supremacy. He was tall for his species, with gray skin that looked like cracked stone and eyes that burned orange like dying embers. He had conquered 17 star systems in his career. He had broken the backs of civilizations older than humanity itself. This small colony world would be nothing more than another trophy for his collection, below his ship. The planet knew. Eden turned slowly in the darkness. It was a young world, barely a century old by human standards. 50 million people lived on its surface. They had built cities and farms and schools. They had raised children and buried their dead in the soil of an alien world. They had called it home. Now they waited to die. Vesic had intercepted their desperate messages to Earth. The humans had begged for help. They had pleaded for someone, anyone, to save them. But Earth was 8 months away at maximum speed. The Galactic Council had refused to get involved. The other species in this region of space had turned their backs, too afraid of the Vexery to offer even words of comfort. Humanity stood alone, and Vesic loved it. He turned to his second-in-command, a younger officer named Korith. The young Vexori's eyes were bright with excitement. This would be his first planetary conquest, and he wanted to prove himself worthy of promotion. "Begin the bombardment sequence," Vesic ordered. His voice was calm, almost bored. "Target their capital city first. I want them to see what happens to species that expand into our territory." Korath bowed his head in respect. "At once, Admiral, it will be my honor too." A sensor alarm cut through his words. The sound was sharp and sudden, like a knife through silk. Every officer on the bridge turned to look at their screens. Something had just entered the system. Vesic felt a flicker of annoyance. He walked to the main sensor display and studied the reading. A ship had dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. Just one ship. It was small, barely 500 meters long. The computer identified it as a cargo hauler, a civilian vessel designed for moving goods between colonies. It was old, too. Very old. Its hull was covered in patches and scars from decades of hard use. One ship? Korith laughed out loud. "They send one ship against our Armada." The other officers joined in the laughter. It spread across the bridge like a wave, and even Vesic allowed himself a small smile. The humans were desperate, yes, but this was simply pathetic. One ancient cargo ship against 12,000 of the most advanced warships in the galaxy. It was not a battle. It was a joke. The ship began broadcasting a message. Vesic ordered it to be played on the main speakers. A woman's voice filled the bridge, calm and steady, speaking in the human language that the translation systems converted automatically. "This is Captain Alina Vasquez of the HSV Adamantin. You have 30 minutes to withdraw from this system." Silence fell across the bridge. For a moment, no one moved. Then the laughter returned, louder than before. Officers held their sides and wiped tears from their eyes. Korith was bent over his console, shaking with amusement. 30 minutes, he gasped. "She gives us 30 minutes. Admiral, should we respond to this comedian?" Vesic shook his head slowly. The human woman was clearly insane, or suicidal, or both. He would not waste his words on someone so far beneath his notice. Let her watch as they burned her colony. Let her die knowing that her pathetic gesture had meant nothing. "Ignore her," he said. "Continue bombardment preparations." The officers returned to their work, still chuckling among themselves. The lone ship on the sensor display continued its slow approach toward the Armada. It made no attempt to hide. It made no attempt to flee. It simply moved forward, steady and sure, like a person walking into a storm down on New Eden. 50 million humans watched the sky and prayed to whatever gods they believed in. They held their children close. They sent final messages to loved ones on distant worlds. They prepared to die with what dignity they could find, but some of them had heard the broadcast too, Some of them knew the name Elena Vasquez. And in the darkest corners of human space, that name meant something. It meant hope. It meant survival against impossible odds. It meant that the universe was not as empty and cold as it seemed. The minutes passed slowly. 29 remained on the ultimatum, in her small cockpit aboard the Adamantine. Captain Vasquez sat in her worn chair and watched the Vexery Armada grow larger on her screens. She was a woman in her early 50s, with gray streaks in her dark hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of hard years and harder choices. Her hands rested on the controls with the ease of someone who had spent a lifetime in space. She did not feel afraid. She had lost the ability to feel fear a long time ago, out in the dark spaces between stars where no one could hear you scream. She had found something out there, something that had changed her forever. And now she had come to use that gift one last time. "Computer," she said quietly, "begin power-up sequence for the primary core." The ship hummed around her. Deep in its belly, something ancient began to stir. Lights flickered along corridors that had not seen use in years. Energy readings climbed higher and higher, past the limits of normal technology, past the boundaries of known science. Elena closed her eyes and let out a slow breath. She thought of the people below, the millions who would die if she failed. She thought of her own crew, the friends she had lost so long ago. She thought of the darkness that had taken everything from her and given her power in return. "Sorry," she whispered to no one. "I hoped it wouldn't come to this." But it had come to this. It always came to this in the end. When humanity faced extinction, someone had to stand up. Someone had to be the shield. Someone had to show the galaxy that the human spirit could not be broken, no matter how many ships the enemy brought today. That someone was her. The Adamantine continued its approach. 25 minutes remained on the ultimatum. And aboard 12,000 warships, Vexery laughed at the foolish human, who thought she could stop them. They would not be laughing for much longer. The galaxy was old. It had seen empires rise and fall like waves on a beach. It had watched species climb from the mud of their homeworlds to the stars, only to fade into dust and memory. In all those billions of years, the galaxy had learned one important truth. Some species were meant to rule. Others were meant to serve. And a few, a very rare few, were meant to be feared. The Vexery believed they belonged to the first group. They had spent 300 years building their dominion, crushing anyone who stood in their way. They saw themselves as the natural masters of the universe, destined to bring order to the chaos of weaker civilizations. But there were stories, whispers that traveled between star systems, passed from trader to traveler to refugee. Stories about the humans, those strange soft creatures from a small blue world on the edge of nowhere. The Vexery had dismissed these stories as myths. As the foolish hopes of conquered peoples, they should have listened more carefully. The Rathani, a peaceful species of scholars and historians, told the story of the Ghost Fleet incident. It had happened 30 years ago, in a distant corner of the galaxy. A human destroyer, badly damaged and alone, had found itself trapped in a narrow passage between two star systems. 200 enemy ships had surrounded it. By all logic, the human vessel should have surrendered. Instead, the captain had fought. For 9 days, that single destroyer held the passage. The captain used debris fields as weapons, creating clouds of shrapnel that tore through enemy hulls. She sent false signals that made the enemy believe reinforcements were coming. She turned off all power and drifted like a dead ship, only to spring back to life when enemies came close. By the time help finally arrived, the destroyer was a wreck, barely holding together. But it was still fighting. And the enemy fleet had lost 60 ships. The Morvathi, ancient beings of crystal and light, spoke of the silence of Kirith 7. A human colony there had faced extinction at the hands of raiders. They had no weapons, no ships, no hope. But they had scientists. When the raiders arrived to find an empty world, they thought the humans had fled. They were wrong. The humans had found a way to destabilize their own sun. Turning it into a weapon that sent waves of radiation across the system, the raiders died screaming as their ships melted around them. The humans emerged from their underground shelters weeks later. Having sacrificed their son to survive, these stories and dozens more like them circulated through the galaxy. Most species thought they were exaggerations, tall tales told to make humans seem more impressive than they were. After all, humans were young. They had only been in space for a few centuries. How could they possibly match the achievements of species that had roamed the stars for thousands of years? But one name appeared again and again in these stories. One person who seemed to be at the center of the most impossible events: Captain Alina Vasquez. 15 years ago, Alina had been a simple cargo pilot. She flew supplies between frontier colonies, earning just enough to keep her ship running and her small crew fed. It was a hard life, but she had been happy. She had a family aboard her ship, people who trusted her with their lives. She thought she would grow old among the stars, hauling cargo until her bones became too weak to handle the strain of space travel. Then the Syndicate's clans came. The Syndicate were pirates, the worst kind of criminals in the galaxy. They attacked a convoy of 12 cargo ships, including Elena's vessel. They killed without mercy. They took what they wanted and destroyed what they could not use. When they left, Flanae was the only survivor. She floated in the wreckage for 3 days before she managed to reach another damaged ship. She spent weeks combining parts from 3 destroyed vessels, building something that could barely move through space. Her food ran out. Her water ran low. She entered cold sleep, the emergency hibernation that humans used when there was no other choice, and drifted into the void between stars. 2 years passed. When she finally woke, her makeshift ship had carried her somewhere impossible. She found herself near a structure that should not exist, a massive ring of metal and crystal that orbited a dead star. It was old beyond measure, built by a species that had vanished before life on Earth had crawled from the oceans. And it was full of technology that made everything else in the galaxy look like children's toys. Alina spent months exploring that ancient structure. She learned things that no living being was supposed to know. She found a power source that defied every law of physics she had ever been taught. And slowly, carefully, she began to rebuild her ship around it. When she finally returned to human space, she was changed. She spoke little about what she had found. She refused to share the technology with anyone, not even the human government. She simply went back to hauling cargo, flying her ancient-looking ship along the quiet lanes between colonies. But she was watching, waiting. She knew that one day humanity would face a threat it could not handle alone. She knew that when that day came, she would have to reveal what she had become now. Above New Eden, that day had arrived. In his command center, Admiral Desix checked the time. 20 minutes remained on the human woman's ridiculous ultimatum. His crews were almost ready to begin the bombardment. Soon the cities below would burn. The humans would learn the price of defiance. He barely noticed the lone ship on his sensors. It was still approaching, still moving with that strange, calm purpose. His officers had stopped laughing about it. Some of them were starting to feel uneasy, though they did not understand why. Admiral Korath said quietly, "The ship is not slowing down. Let it come. What can one vessel do against us?" Korath hesitated. "The energy readings from that ship are strange. Our sensors cannot identify its power source." Desix waved a hand dismissively. "Old technology often confuses modern sensors. It means nothing." But something in his chest felt tight, a feeling he had not experienced in decades. It took him a moment to recognize it. It was doubt, across the void. Alina Vasquez watched her screens and counted down the minutes. She did not want this fight. She had hoped that the Vexery would see reason, would recognize that some battles were not worth fighting. But she had known, deep in her heart, that they would not listen. They never listened. 18 minutes, she said softly. 18 minutes until everything changes. The ancient core at the heart of her ship pulsed with power. It was ready. She was ready. All that remained was for the Vexery to make their choice. Below, on New Eden, a young girl looked up at the sky and saw a single point of light moving against the darkness. Her mother had told her stories about the Guardian Captain, the woman who appeared when all hope was lost. She did not know if those stories were true, but for the first time since the Vexery arrived, She allowed herself to hope. The first shots were fired at 15 minutes past the ultimatum. Admiral Vesix had grown tired of waiting. The lone human ship had continued its slow approach, drifting closer and closer to his armada with a calm that bordered on insanity. It made no attempt to communicate further. It made no attempt to flee. It simply kept coming, like a person walking into the ocean with no intention of stopping. "Forward screen," Vesix commanded. "Destroy that vessel." 300 warships broke formation and moved to intercept the Adamantin. They were the smallest ships in the Armada, fast attack cruisers designed to eliminate threats quickly and efficiently. Each one carried enough firepower to level a city. Together, they could crack open a small moon. Captain Elena Vasquez watched them come. Her screen showed the energy signatures of their weapons charging, the bright points of light that meant death was only seconds away. She did not move. She did not try to run. She simply sat in her chair and waited. The forward screen opened fire. 300 ships unleashed their weapons at the same moment. Plasma beams, kinetic rounds, energy torpedoes, and missile swarms all converged on a single point in space. The barrage was so intense that sensor systems across the fleet temporarily overloaded. The light of the attack could be seen from the surface of New Eden, second sun blooming in the darkness above. Admiral Vesix allowed himself a satisfied smile. Nothing could survive that kind of punishment. The foolish human woman had died for her arrogance, just as he had known she would. Now they could return to the real business of conquering this pathetic world. Then the light faded, and the smile died on his face. The Adamantin hung in space, completely untouched. The hull that had looked old and scarred moments ago now shimmered with a faint golden light. The massive barrage, enough firepower to destroy a moon, had bent around the vessel like water flowing past a stone. Not deflected, not absorbed, simply redirected, as if some invisible force had decided that those weapons were not allowed to touch this particular ship. Silence fell across the command bridge. Officers stared at their screens with wide eyes and open mouths. Some of them began checking their instruments, convinced that they must be malfunctioning. Others simply sat frozen, unable to process what they had just witnessed. "That is not possible," Korath whispered. "That is not possible." Vesix felt his throat go dry. In 3 centuries of warfare, he had never seen anything like this. The technology required to deflect that kind of attack did not exist. It could not exist. The laws of physics simply did not allow it, and yet there it was. A single ship, unharmed. Drifting through the debris of a failed attack, then the Adamantin responded. It did not fire weapons. There was no flash of light, no explosion, no visible beam of energy. Instead, a wave of something invisible rippled outward from the ship's hull. It moved through space like a ring expanding from a stone dropped in still water. Passing through the forward screen of warships in less than a second, the effects were immediate and terrifying. Aboard every ship touched by that wave, systems began to shut down. Engines went silent. Weapons powered off. Navigation computers went dark. Shield generators stopped working. It happened so quickly and so completely that crews barely had time to realize something was wrong before their vessels went dead. But the wave was precise. Horribly, impossibly precise. Life support systems remained untouched. Emergency lighting flickered on. Communications continued to function. The crews were alive, unharmed, able to breathe and speak and watch as their ships became metal coffins drifting in the void. 300 warships, disabled in a single heartbeat, on the bridge of the eternal supremacy. Admiral Vesix gripped the railing so hard that his knuckles turned white. His officers were shouting, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Some were calling for retreat. Others were demanding a full assault. A few simply sat at their stations, too shocked to speak. "What did she do?" someone asked. "What was that?" No one had an answer. The technology that had just been demonstrated was beyond anything the Vexery had ever encountered. Beyond anything any species in the galaxy had ever encountered. It was like watching a child's toy face, a weapon from the gods themselves. The adamantine continued its approach. It passed through the disabled forward screen as if those 300 ships were nothing more than obstacles to be avoided. The golden shimmer faded from its hull, leaving behind the same scarred and patched exterior it had shown before. But now that old appearance seemed like a disguise, a mask hiding something terrible underneath. Alina Vasquez's voice came through the communication systems again. This time, her tone was different. Not threatening. Not angry. Just tired. That was your only warning. I have disabled your forward screen. Their crews are alive, and their life support is functioning. They will drift until someone collects them. I take no pleasure in this. I only wish to protect the people on that planet below. Please, Admiral, take your fleet and leave. There does not need to be any more of this. Desix listened to her words, and for a moment he actually considered them. Some part of him, the part that had survived 100 battles by knowing when to fight and when to run, screamed at him to withdraw. This was not a battle he could win. This was not even a battle at all. It was an execution waiting to happen. But another part of him, the part built on 3 centuries of conquest and pride, refused to accept defeat. He was Admiral Vesix of the Vexery Dominion. He had never retreated. He had never surrendered. He would not let one human woman, no matter what tricks she possessed, make him a coward. All ships, he commanded, his voice hard as iron. Full assault. Concentrate all fire on that vessel. Every weapon, every ship. Destroy her. His officers hesitated for just a moment. Then training took over, and they began relaying his orders to the fleet. 11,700 warships began to move, forming into attack patterns that had crushed civilizations across the galaxy. On her small bridge, Alina heard the Vexery response through her own communications intercepts. She closed her eyes and let out a long, slow breath. She had truly hoped that it would not come to this. "I'm sorry," she said to no one. "I gave you a chance." Deep within the adamantine, the ancient core began to pulse with new intensity. Power levels climbed higher and higher, past anything Alina had ever attempted before. The ship itself seemed to hum with energy, vibrating at a frequency that was felt rather than heard. 11,700 warships, millions of souls aboard them, all of them about to learn a lesson that would change the galaxy forever. The adamantine turned to face the oncoming fleet, and Alina Vasquez prepared to do what she had been born to do: protect humanity, no matter the cost. The universe had never seen such an attack. 11,700 warships fired at exactly the same moment. Their weapons lit up the darkness of space like a new star being born. Plasma beams thick as rivers. Missile swarms that numbered in the millions. Kinetic rounds the size of buildings. Energy weapons that could slice through planets. All of it, every bit of destructive power the Vexery Dominion possessed. Focused on a single point in space, the adamantine vanished behind a wall of light and fire. On the surface of New Eden, people stopped what they were doing and looked up. The sky had turned white. The darkness of night was pushed aside by the glow of weapons fire so intense that it cast shadows on the ground below. Some fell to their knees, convinced that this was the end of everything. Others held each other close and whispered final words of love. A little girl named Maya stood on her balcony and watched the light show above. She did not look away. She did not cry. She simply watched, her small hands gripping the railing, her eyes fixed on the spot where the lone ship had been. "On," she whispered. Come on, come on, come on. Aboard the Eternal Supremacy." Admiral Vesix leaned forward in his command chair. His eyes were locked on the tactical display, watching the point where all that firepower converged. Nothing could survive that. Nothing in the history of galactic warfare had ever survived that level of concentrated destruction. The human woman was dead. She had to be dead. The barrage lasted for exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds of every weapon in the fleet firing without pause. Then the weapons ran hot and needed to cool. The firing stopped. The light began to fade, and the adamantine emerged from the inferno, completely unharmed. Admiral Desix felt his heart stop. For one terrible moment, His mind simply refused to accept what his eyes were showing him. The ship was there. It was intact. Its hull still shimmered with that faint golden light, now brighter than before, pulsing like a heartbeat. It had just absorbed enough firepower to destroy 100 worlds. And it looked as if nothing had happened at all. Then Captain Elena Vasquez spoke. Her voice came through every communication system in the fleet. It was broadcast to every bridge, every crew station, every speaker on every ship. And it carried a weight that made grown warriors tremble. I gave you a chance. The Adamantin's ancient core released its full power. Rings of light began to expand from the ship's hull. They were beautiful in a terrible way. Golden halos that spread outward like ripples on a pond, moving through space faster than any ship could flee. Each ring was larger than the one before, reaching further into the Vexery formation with every passing second. The first ring hit the nearest warships. Thousands of vessels went dark in an instant. Engines died. Weapons powered down. Shield generators failed. The mighty warships of the Vexery Dominion became nothing more than metal boxes drifting in the void. The second ring spread even further. More ships fell silent. Crews watched in horror as their controls stopped responding, as their screens went blank. As all the power that made their vessels dangerous simply vanished, ring after ring expanded outward. Desix watched his tactical display as ship after ship went offline. The formation that had taken decades to build was crumbling in seconds. Thousands of years of military tradition and technological advancement reduced to nothing by waves of golden light. "Stop it," he commanded, his voice cracking. "Someone stop it. Fire again. Fire everything." But there was nothing to fire with. The rings had reached the center of the fleet now. The largest dreadnoughts, the mightiest battleships, the vessels that represented the pride of the Dominion, all of them fell silent one by one. Officers screamed into dead communication systems. Engineers tried desperately to restart failed reactors. Soldiers stood at weapon stations that no longer worked. The eternal supremacy shuddered as the final ring reached it. Desix watched his bridge lights flicker and die. The tactical display went dark. The engines fell silent. Emergency lighting kicked on, casting everything in a dim red glow. Around him, his officers sat in stunned silence. 12,000 warships. The greatest armada the Vexery Dominion had ever assembled. All of it disabled in less than 17 minutes. Not destroyed. There were no explosions, no deaths, no casualties at all. The crews were alive. Life support was functioning. They would survive. But they would survive knowing that they had been utterly, completely, humiliatingly defeated. Admiral Desix slowly rose from his command chair. His legs felt weak. His hands were shaking. He walked to the main viewport and looked out at the scene before him. Thousands of ships drifted in the darkness, their running lights dead, their engines cold. They looked like corpses floating in an ocean of stars, and there, moving through them like a shepherd among sleeping sheep, was the Adamantin. The tiny cargo hauler that had just brought the mightiest military force in the galaxy to its knees. The ship passed close by the eternal supremacy. So close that Desix could see through its bridge windows. And there, sitting calmly in her captain's chair, was Elena Vasquez. Their eyes met across the void. Desix had expected to see triumph in her face. He had expected gloating, or hatred, or the cold satisfaction of a victor looking down at the defeated. But he saw none of those things. Elena Vasquez looked tired. She looked sad. She looked like a person who had done something terrible, because she had no other choice. There was no joy in her victory. There was only the heavy weight of someone who had hoped desperately that this would not be necessary. She gave him a small nod, not mocking, almost respectful, as if she understood exactly what he was feeling. And she was sorry that it had come to this. Then the Adamantin drifted past, continuing its slow patrol through the graveyard of dead ships down on New Eden. The people watched the lights in the sky go out one by one. At first, they thought the worst had happened. They thought the attack had succeeded, and now the bombardment would begin. Parents held their children. Lovers held each other. Everyone prepared to die. Then someone noticed that the Vexery ships were dark. All of them. Every single one. And still moving among them, small but unmistakable, was a single point of light. The cheering began slowly, but it spread like wildfire. People poured into the streets, laughing and crying and embracing strangers. They did not understand what had happened. They did not know how one ship had defeated 12,000. They only knew that they were alive, and the monsters in the sky could no longer hurt them. Maya stood on her balcony and smiled. She had known. Somehow she had known. The Guardian Captain was real, and she had saved them all. The news spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. Within hours, every major civilization knew what had happened at New Eden. Monitoring drones from a dozen different species had recorded the entire battle. The footage showed everything. The massive Vexery Armada, the lone human ship, the impossible defense, and the devastating response. 12,000 warships disabled without a single casualty. In less than 17 minutes, the Galactic Council called an emergency session for the first time in 200 years. Representatives from every major species gathered in the Great Chamber on Nexus Prime, the ancient space station that served as neutral ground for galactic diplomacy. They sat in their assigned sections, hundreds of different beings from hundreds of different worlds, all of them trying to understand what they had just witnessed. The Rethany representative, an elderly scholar named Voss, was the first to speak. His voice was quiet but carried to every corner of the chamber. "We warned them," he said. "We told stories of human resilience, of human ingenuity, of the impossible things humans have done when pushed to the edge of extinction. The Vexery called them myths. They laughed at our warnings. They are not laughing now." Murmur ran through the assembly. The Vexery representative sat alone in his section, his head bowed in shame. The Dominion had ordered him to say nothing, to avoid any statements that might make things worse. There was nothing he could say anyway. The footage spoke for itself. The Morvathi ambassador, a being of shifting crystal and light, rose to address the chamber. "The technology displayed by that vessel is unlike anything in our records. We have searched our archives, which contain information dating back 3 billion years. We found nothing. Wherever Captain Vasquez obtained that power, it came from something older than any of us. Something we did not know existed? The real question," said the Centauri representative, a tall insectoid creature with clicking mandibles, "is what this means for the balance of power in the galaxy. If humanity possesses such technology, they could conquer us all." The human ambassador stood. She was a middle-aged woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, a diplomat who had spent her career building bridges between species. She looked around the chamber with calm, steady eyes. "We have no interest in conquest," she said simply. "We never have. All we have ever wanted is to live in peace, to explore the stars, to build a future for our children. The adamantine is not a weapon of war. It is a shield. It exists to protect, not to attack. Captain Vasquez could have destroyed that fleet. She chose not to. She disabled their ships but left their crews alive. That should tell you everything you need to know about human intentions." Silence fell over the chamber. The representatives looked at each other, uncertain how to respond. They had come expecting to discuss a threat, to plan responses to a new danger. Instead, they were faced with something they had not anticipated: mercy, even in victory. The humans had shown mercy. 2 days later, the Galactic Council issued a formal declaration. Humanity was reclassified from emerging species to protected sovereign entity. This was a status reserved for civilizations too powerful to challenge, too important to ignore. It meant that any attack on human space would be considered an attack on the galactic order itself. The Vexery Dominion withdrew from New Eden, and the 3 other human systems they had occupied, they had no choice. Their fleet would take years to repair, and they knew that the adamantine could return at any moment. Admiral Vesix was quietly removed from command and sent to a distant outpost where he could cause no more trouble. He spent the rest of his life staring at the stars, remembering the tired, sad eyes of the woman who had destroyed everything he believed in. On Earth, The celebrations lasted for weeks. People danced in the streets of every city. They raised glasses to the unknown hero who had saved New Eden. They told stories of the battle, telling more dramatic than the last. Within months, the stand at New Eden had become the most famous event in human history. But Captain Elena Vasquez wanted no part of the celebrations. She refused all interviews. She declined every medal and honor that Earth tried to give her. She ignored the requests from scientists who wanted to study her ship, from governments who wanted to understand her technology, from military leaders who wanted to learn from her tactics. She simply said no to all of them, firmly but politely. Instead, she returned to the shipping lanes. The Adamantin went back to hauling cargo between frontier colonies, just as it had done for 15 years. Anyone who saw it would think it was just another old freighter, scarred and patched and barely holding together. They would never guess what it really was, what power it truly contained. Alina liked it that way. She had never wanted to be a hero. She had never wanted fame or glory or power. She had only wanted to protect the people who could not protect themselves. Now that the job was done, she was content to fade back into the background, to become just another face in the crowd of space travelers. But she knew it was not over. The galaxy was vast and full of dangers. Sooner or later, another threat would rise. Another enemy would think humanity was weak, was helpless, was ready to be conquered. And when that day came, she would be there. In the years that followed, the story of Captain Vasquez became a legend. Children on 100 worlds grew up hearing tales of the Guardian Captain, the woman who appeared when all hope was lost. Some said she was immortal, kept alive by the ancient technology in her ship. Others claimed she was the last member of a secret order, protectors who watched over humanity from the shadows. The truth was simpler than any legend. Alina Vasquez was just a woman who had lost everything, who had drifted alone through the darkness, had found something ancient and terrible and wonderful. A woman who had decided that as long as she drew breath, she would not let anyone else suffer what she had suffered. She was human, and that was enough. On the anniversary of the Battle of New Eden, Maya, the little girl who had watched from her balcony, looked up at the stars. She was a year older now, but she had not forgotten. She would never forget. "Thank you," she whispered to the darkness. "Wherever you are, thank you." Somewhere, light years away, Alina Vasquez sat in her worn captain's chair and watched the stars drift by. She did not know about Maya. She did not know about the millions of people who considered her their hero. She only knew that she had done what needed to be done, and now she could rest. Until the next time, because the galaxy had learned an important lesson at New Eden. Humans did not need vast armadas. They did not need empires or alliances or ancient technology. All they needed was one stubborn soul who refused to give up, who refused to let the darkness win. And the void was full of such souls, watching, waiting, ready. That was humanity's true strength, not their ships or their weapons or their technology, their spirit. And that was something no enemy could ever defeat.